All right, I think we're ready to chat. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, and welcome to the 9th episode of the FCCI Cacao Academy. Today is August 19th, 2020. My name is Lauren Heineck of Well Tempered Media, and I am moderating this series of conversations. If you are just joining us, we would love for you to check the previous episodes that are available on the FCCI Facebook page. Last week, for our 8th episode, there was a brilliant overview of what is the FCCI Cacao Academy project, and then on to the guest for the week of Fede Cacao. Today, I'm joined by the co-creators of this project, Dr. Carla Martin, Harvard lecturer and executive director of the Fine Cacao and Chocolate Institute, and Alyssa Jade McDonald-Bertel of Cacao Academy. And our special invite for the day is Dr. Nina Huntemann. Welcome, Nina. She is the Vice President of Learning at edX, and we'll be diving into the conversation today around access to information and compassion and passion for learning. It is great to be here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And thank you for joining us. So there's something that I would like to get started with, which is a simple piece of a word that I don't use in my traditional vocabulary. So as Carla and Liz talk about the updates since last week, I would hope also for a quick definition of what is pedagogy and how does that come into context with our conversation today.
Well, pedagogy is the theory and methods of teaching children, actually. The beginning of the word ped refers to children, but it has been largely adopted as meaning the theory and methods of just teaching any population. And so we do use it interchangeably. Most of the work that I've been involved with my whole career is about teaching adults, and there's another word for that, andragogy, which is hard to say and a lot of people don't recognize. So we say pedagogy. That is the theory and methods of teaching.
Thank you. And both Carla and Liz, anything that can fill us in from where we left off last week, and then we'll ask Nina more about her role at edX.
Yeah. So we've had a really exciting week on our end. We have now contracted with a photography and videography team to do production on some of our first curriculum units that will be employed in the training of cacao farmers in Nicaragua. And you'll remember last week we shared details about the specific challenges that these groups of people face in accessing information that are related to literacy, that are related to connectivity, whether or not they're able to get on Wi-Fi or have a data plan, that are also related to their own vision. Many of them, report compromised vision, but maybe don't have access to visit someone who could give them glasses or a vision test. So there are all different kinds of challenges that they face, none of which make them incapable of learners, but all of which mean that the curriculum that we design must be calibrated to their particular needs and also to their wants. So starting next week, we will be doing some cacao bean glamour shots, some videos, some recorded conversations, and getting things ready so that they will be appropriate for this group to learn.
Absolutely. To this end, as Carla mentions, we're creating the curriculum to exactly the needs of the farmers. And in the case with Nicaragua, we notice that we have layers of people involved in communities that have more access to technology, communication, and connectivity, and some who have less. So what we are planning is a type of a filtered system where we're sending volumes of curriculum and training through different digital channels. So as people have different access to different methods, communications, connectivities, there's always a place where they can participate in the current week's worth of curriculum. So in the end, it doesn't always mean there's only one, let's say, digital classroom to only go to, but it's like leaving little pieces in little different digital methods. So as a person or a farmer is maybe coming to village or coming to a town and being able to access more Wi-Fi or greater bandwidth, well, then they can download some more videos or some materials. Whereas if there are some farmers that because of phytosanitation needs or taking care of the family are still in very remote areas, they will still have access to the current training in the FCCI Cacao Academy, regardless of whether they've been able to come into town or not. And this is something that we've prioritized to be our #1 goal, is no matter where a farmer is, they should have access to the week's training, whatever's going on, because actually we have the luxury position to be able to formulate training according to their needs, timelines, and challenges and opportunities. And so we should rather deliver always flexibly and be available then for the farmer's needs. How can I, what best suits me to learn this week? And that they never miss out, no matter what is happening in life, they should never miss out on the chance to keep up with curriculum. And I think that's the perfect entree, for example, for speaking with Nina today, who has built a strong career and program, it's seemingly based on this idea of accessibility.
Yeah, it's really great to hear you thinking about and approaching the curriculum design with inclusivity already at the forefront of your mind. In one of the things you can say about accessibility is that access is just the first step. You have to make sure that that access is equitable. So you may say, I put a course online, now it's accessible because before you had to physically come to a campus or come to a training facility to take it. Well, there may be other barriers once you're online that are not as visible as physical distance. And you've already named them, right? Most importantly, connectivity access if you're using digital platforms. But you've also touched upon some other ones. You've touched upon physical impairments, as potential accessibility issues. And again, thinking at the outset about a very inclusive teaching approach is critical. And it's one of the things that the edX platform is designed to attend to. And it's part of all of our enablement and training materials when we work with partners who are digitally designing curriculum.
Nina, can we stay within the space of what is edX for those who are listening and are not familiar with the platform? And particularly, I've understood that it's enormous and that you have 20 million members that use it and can access it. And there's a very wide range of courses available. So if you would also go into who can create courses and who they're available for.
I will, and it can be a little confusing because we're multiple things. So if you had access to the internet and you went to edX.org, you would land on edX's homepage. And our nonprofit organization, which was founded by Harvard and MIT in 2012, that's what you're encountering. So the edX.org website is an incredibly robust learning platform with over 150 universities, nonprofits, governments, and companies who've created curriculum, courses, programs, and are offering it on that site. So in many ways, edX.org is an aggregator of educational materials. But we also are a platform. So the learning management system or the learning experience system that you as a student would encounter on edX.org is actually based on our technology called Open edX. Open edX is an educational platform that is free. It's open source. Your organization could download it, install it, and decide to start offering courses through that platform. It's what runs edX.org, so we use our own platform to deliver educational content. We now have, in part because of a lot of people being forced to learn remotely, we actually surpassed 32 million learners recently. And so on edX.org, learning on our open source platform, Open edX, we have 32 million learners engaging with our 150 global partners.
That's incredible. Well, congratulations on that achievement. Obviously, we come into that in a precarious time, and I hope that you'll speak to some of that as well, of what you've seen in terms of engagement or access. There's a word that I had also learned recently, and that is MOOCs, and this is this massive open online courses. I know that you offer those, and that's available, and you yourself have even had courses online, which is great. I would love to hear about that. But I'd be interested to hear more about curriculum design and what that looks like, and knowing that Carla and Liz are building something from the get-go that will be digital and collaborative. Maybe some tips or means of how that will impact their own project.
Happy to. Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit more about what a MOOC is. So certainly using technology to teach and for students to learn is not new. Doing so online is also not new. But prior to the 2011, 2012, most of the online courses that a student could access were fairly limited in the number of students who would be in a given course. And so, for example, my university that I was teaching with at the time, we might offer a course and there might be 40 students online and learning. The real shift to MOOCs, massive online open courses, is a couple of things. First of all, the massive part. The very first course on edX that was delivered by the founder of edX, Anat Agarwal, an MIT professor, had 150,000 students in it at the same time. How in the world can you facilitate learning among 150,000 students? Well, it requires some teaching and learning technology to not only facilitate, but make sure that the learning itself is efficacious, that it is sticking, that it is true learning. It's not about just watching a video, going to a TED Talk or going to YouTube and just watching a video and walking away. That's not learning. So a MOOC platform combines, video elements with some learning activities, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the other part, the open, is there's no admissions. You don't have to apply to a university or, apply to an organization to get in. You find the course, you enroll, and you're in. You can start learning immediately. So that massive and that open was the real innovation in online learning that happened when platforms like edX hit the scene in 2011, 2012. Yeah. So to your second question about what are some of the tips and tricks of any online learning experience that you're building, whether or not you expect to have 100,000 learners in it, is, well, a few things that you've already mentioned, really thinking about the learner and meeting them where they are. So you want to have an inclusive learning approach. And I actually think that digital learning technologies allow us to do that better than traditional methods. Why is that? Well, for example, in a traditional classroom, when I'm meeting students face-to-face, and perhaps we're getting together 1 hour a day, 3 days a week, I use that time to teach them, and I typically just use one method. I may lecture, or I may just do a discussion, or maybe I'm able to break the hour up into a little bit of lecture and a little bit of discussion. But when you go online, you can now provide the same material to students in multiple modalities. You could create a video of the lecture. You could have them read a text. You could have them discussing together. You could have students create their own videos. All of this can happen within the learning experience. And what's really important about that is that some students will attend to some modalities of learning better than others. At the end of the day, the more ways that you do engage with learning material, you watch, you read, you try, the more efficacious the learning is, the more it sticks, the more you actually are able to transform what you learned into something new that you can do. And so I would encourage, as you develop your digital curriculum, thinking about not just one way to teach a concept. Oh, we'll do a video on that concept. Well, maybe you do a video on that concept, but then you also find a really great graphic that explains that concept. And perhaps there is some short text that also explains that concept. And then maybe you have students teach each other the concept. That's another method. So point being is that the digital space allows you to have multiple modalities to teach the same material, but by doing so, it's more accessible to students and more likely to stick, more likely for them to actually be able to learn a new thing.
Thanks for taking us through that, Nina. One of the things that has been so important to the work we're doing on cacao farmers is the research into why it actually mostly doesn't work. And that's because exactly what you're describing often happens. People will turn up to a group meeting, and this is often a rural setting, it's kind of partly outside, they may not have, technology available to them. Someone who has a varying, there are varying degrees of their own understanding is tasked with training a group in maybe 2-3 hours and then sending them home. And a lot of people will ask, well, why didn't, they said that they came and they understood, so why didn't they go home and then do what they were supposed to do on the farm? But the truth is they didn't have the option to discuss it in more detail. They didn't have the option to practice it in person right there, to show it to someone else. They didn't have the repeatability that you're describing of maybe looking on a text, looking on a video, looking on a graphic image or something like that. And this is, it's really the basics of digital pedagogy that you're describing, but that have not yet been employed with any kind of thoughtfulness or equitability in most farmer training globally. And so we're excited to hear you say all of these things, knowing that these are missing currently in cacao farmer training.
Yeah, and the pedagogy that you're describing, which is really the pedagogy that underlines edX's platform, is called active learning, right? The idea that in order for transformational learning to occur, a student has to be an active participant in constructing this new knowledge and these new skills, not a passive recipient. So in what you described, showing up for a 2-hour workshop and listening to somebody explain something is a pretty passive activity. And then when I go home, you have it happens to all of us. We start to forget, right? You start to forget what you've heard. And as a result, as you forget, it doesn't change your behavior. It doesn't change your mental models. It doesn't really add information to the way that you do your work or see your sector or what have you. And so really key there is turning the learning into an active experience. And there's so many opportunities to do that. We mentioned just a few. You mentioned a few. Maybe you have to demonstrate right there for your peers your new understanding, your new skill. Again, maybe there's a discussion. One technique I love is just to simply ask the room, what's the muddiest point? Of everything I just told you about in the last 30 minutes, what did you least understand? And then you have a discussion about that muddiest point. Just simply doing that is an incredibly impactful a change from passive to active, because it requires the learner to think, what did I just hear? What do I understand? That feels good. That feels good. Oh, that concept, still don't get that. Let me ask about that. And then you hear from others like, oh, I was confused on that too. Or I understood that. Maybe I can explain it to you in a different way. It seems like a small little moment, but doing that in person can be transformational. You can do that online too, where you could have students watch a short lecture, and then after the lecture, ask them, what was the thing you least understood? Post a question in the discussion forum, and then peers can start responding, oh, I didn't understand that either, and type a response, or I think it means this. And that small change is so impactful.
Yeah, thanks. We also, we see that the farmers themselves report that this is what they want. They want active learning. So in surveying them, which we just did recently, we ask, what do you prefer? Do you want to listen to something? Do you want to watch something? The number one, the top thing that they like to learn is conversations among friends or with experts. And so they were like, sure, we're happy to look at videos, images, all of these things are fair game for us. But what we really like is to talk it through with someone. And so we see that as essential to everything that we'll be building out here.
Yeah, and so there's the second piece, active learning is important, but then you've just added on the layer of peer learning. And one of the reasons why that's so critical, and I would imagine particularly for these farmers, is, their community, the communities they're in, the community of people that they've been working with, they have knowledge. They have experience. And one of the things that is egregious, in my opinion, is to have experts come in, right, in any field or sector and tell you how to do a thing and not acknowledge the deep experience and expertise that already exists within that community. And even if that knowledge and expertise needs to transform, needs to be modernized, could be more efficient, of course, but start with an acknowledgement about what they know, what they already come with, and then make connections into how to change those mental models, those skills, into perhaps more efficient, more equitable, more environmentally friendly methods. But you have to acknowledge that original learning. That is one of the key differences between pedagogy, teaching children, and teaching adults that we often don't talk about. when I say meet people where they are, that includes not just the ways in which their connectivity might be challenged, not just perhaps their physical or mental impairments, but also meet them where their knowledge is, where their skills are, and build from there. First of all, you'll be seen as much more of a collaborative contributor, as opposed to an injecting, force who's just coming in and saying, here's the way to do things. So peer learning is, again, hand in hand with active learning, is a real recipe for effective and transformational learning.
I'm sure that all of these things are resonating with Carla and Liz, and Carla herself being a teacher firsthand, having some of those experiences with her students. I was really fascinated by this concept of community expertise and would love to spend some time in that space, or even recognizing that some of the communities that Carla and Liz hope to provide this project to have experienced difficulties in the past in terms of natural destruction, or now dealing with a global pandemic, and how these disturbances might affect the learning that takes place or could through a digital platform.
Yeah, certainly one of the things that we have seen is a huge increase in traffic coming to our website wanting to learn from many different sectors, whether it's professionals, educators wanting to learn a thing to teach their students, or students looking to fill gaps from learning that had to cease in person. But one of the underlying challenges, and a lot of universities, what I know very well, experienced this, is that when students had to go back home to learn, their access to a lot of the technologies that would typically be available to them disappeared. And so either, as we've already mentioned, connectivity, or even just, how do I learn when I'm in a small space now? My whole family is here. I'm trying to do my homework at the kitchen table, but my sisters, my brothers, my parents, and so forth. Really, really challenging. As well as just the stress right now of trying to learn, trying to have the space, time, physical space, and mental space to be able to learn is really, really challenging. And I think, one of the methods to sort of help is really to learn together with others. I mean, to find community as you're trying to learn. I don't know if I've answered your question, but what you described really resonated with a lot of things that we're seeing too. It's great that technology is available to be able to learn remotely when we can't be physically together, but we're doing so in such a stressful and anxiety-producing environment that itself gets in the way of learning. As stress levels increase, there's a threshold at which some stress is good. Some stress actually attunes our mind to learn, but there's a level at which stress actually shuts down cognitive ability. And so now we're under such a stressful moment. How do we bring that stress down so that we actually can open our minds to be able to learn? And it's really hard, really, really hard.
Absolutely. To this end, we've noticed that, for example, many communities that we are working in, Nina, they are struggling with access to water, hygiene, sanitation, sufficient nutrition, dietary diversity. And so we are highly aware that, as Lauren and yourself mentioned, the environment around learning is as important as the content itself. And something that we've been thinking about is, how can we address these like multifactorial impacts, as in challenges that make life already difficult enough, let alone having the open mind to being wanting to learn, being wanting to have experimental mindset, being wanting to execute critical thinking and logic structures, just the things that stand in the way of that, to somehow bring these two worlds together. So for example, in a very basic way, we are working on, for example, learning modules where there is, for example, a technical aspect of cutting a cacao bean, for example, for a physical quality test. To this end, we're also packing it around with things like wound management and healthy, clean water and sanitation. So we're hoping to, on one side, while we address cacao training as itself, pack in life quality and life contribution. As you mentioned, right now, we're in a global pandemic, we have big situations. What have you thought about at edX about how can we help influence this learning environment and the other influences that enable people to come to a good space for that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we've done directly, which I'll talk about, but then also what we see our university and other partners doing with their learning environments. And what you're talking about, something again often overlooked, is that learning is also contextual. And contextual meaning, you know, where am I and what is going on around me? And of course, who am I as well? And some of that we've already addressed with this concept of inclusive teaching. But our context since January has changed significantly for all the reasons that you just described. And in many ways, until you have some basic stability, it's really difficult to load on top of that learning. But I love what you described in this technique you're teaching about how to cut a bean so that it can be inspected, and thinking like, what are some of the things that could happen during that moment? Oh, one could get cut. So let's also make sure that we wrap wound management around that learning. Again, you're thinking about the context. You're thinking about, as someone does this, what might occur? You know, it's not about doing it in the lab. You're talking about doing it in real time in their space. And so what are some of the things that occur, and providing that learning at the same time? So I think that parallels what we saw a lot of universities do with their students as they shifted to remote learning. And some schools, frankly, did it better than others. Some schools, as they sent students home, realized they're not going to have internet connection. And so incredible story of the CUNY system in New York, literally driving a bus to parking lot where students could come and sit in their cars to get Wi-Fi access, right? So we're not talking about the content of the learning. We're talking about the context of the learning. It's like, we're gonna help provide the internet connectivity you need to be able to do the remote learning we've set up, so you can continue to get your courses by literally, you know, driving a bus that has Wi-Fi to you. So again, that's just one example how to tend to that. One of the things that we've done on edX is there's a recognition that online learning is challenging because in part it requires a lot of self-efficacy. The learning is very self-driven. Because you're not coming to a classroom. It's taught asynchronously, which I think will be in part a lot of your materials as well, meaning that there isn't a live instructor like we're doing now. You have modules that you can learn anytime you want. That's all fantastic for flexibility and for accessibility and for inclusivity, but it also really challenges you in self-direction and self-efficacy. You have to, as the individual learner, be quite organized, you know, hold yourself accountable to do the learning. So it's hard to do, right? It's hard for any of us to do in a normal time when just life is busy, but now it's even more so. So how can we help support each other? There are many ways in which you can do that without taking on what edX did, but, you know, setting up peer groups, study groups, finding study buddies. These are all tried and true methods. We have actually added a tech support service to some of our programs. So if you are enrolled in one of our courses that offers this service, you actually get connected with a coach. And usually through texting, if that's your preferred means of communication, they'll help you stay on track. They'll talk to you about, in this case, your career goals. If you're struggling with the material, ways to develop good study habits. They'll also do live phone support, but most often people just want the text support, you know, the text-based support. So we've added that to some of our programs in recognition that it's hard to do these things on our own. Accountability and mentorship and coaching are really important.
That is a fantastic point, Nina. To this end, there's been some literature that has been written about farmer training and the effectiveness of it. And one of the other points that you bring up, that comes up is motivation as well, in terms of the sense. So often, for example, in agricultural training, there's a lot of money spent by aid organizations, literally thrown at, if we just teach farmers more, then they'll just produce more crop. The, you know, volume in, volume out assumption, as opposed to the sense about, as you mentioned before, there's the motivation around the capacity to learn and the access to learn, but also the sense. Like, what am I learning? And is this relevant to me as such? And certainly what we've noticed in our preparation and research for this is how little farmers are even asked, what would you like to learn? Not just the how, but the what. And I think sometimes, you know, perhaps in the world that we are very lucky and privileged to live in now, we feel a lot of self-determination and capacity to choose what we like. And we really recognize that farmers are often in these rural locations not given such a choice of things that they learned, and rather they are even being sold the idea you should be lucky that people are turning up and giving you this training without at all, as you mentioned before, thinking, well, there's inherent knowledge, there's intergenerational skills, and there's also wish and wisdom and capacity that's already there. And so, for example, one thing that Carla and I do before we start is we start polling our farmers in terms of all of these things, which one would you like to learn first and which one is more interesting? So I think this brings to the point that you mentioned, it's the skill set to access the learning and the motivation to stay on board, but also that fundamental choice of what am I turning up and spending my time on? Could you speak to how you see motivation impacting effectiveness in training?
I mean, it's critical. Absolutely. And what you're describing, and I'm really excited to hear your approach, it's called learner-centered design. Learner-centered design really puts the learner at the center of the course design and course delivery. And it starts with asking them what they want to learn and why. So that gets to motivation, right? And so your polling farmers is fantastic. We also, we at edX consult and provide our partners with the advice to also find out what learners want. When folks come to our platform, they come usually by doing some sort of Google search, right? And we use those search terms to understand what people are looking for. We also talk to enterprises that are using our courses to train their employees. What are you looking for? So starting with that question of like, what do you want to learn and why should be the beginning of the curriculum design process, right? Don't come in saying, we know what they want to learn and why they should learn it, because it's just not going to go over well. People are not going to open their minds to the learning. And motivation is also incredibly informative for the instructor, because if I understand your motivation, then I can use that information to make connections to why what I'm teaching you is going to help you with your goals, not going to help me with my goals, right? The goal in the example you described of money coming in to train farmers to produce more. Okay, volume production sounds like the goal of that educational training. Is that the goal of the farmer? And maybe it is, but how would they articulate that goal? And volume at what expense? Maybe they want to produce more, but not at some expense of other things that are important. And so any learner will be very suspicious of what the educator's goal is. And if there's a mismatch between the educator's goal and my goal as a student, you're not going to be open to hear new things. You're not going to be open to interrogate the way that you may think already. You're not going to be open to changing your mental models. You're not going to be open to changing your skills. Essentially, you're not going to be open to learning. And so making that connection for sure. Step number one, what do you want to learn and why?
Those are both really great points. Thank you. And as Liz was explaining that, I was envisioning in my head a search bar for farmers so that they could type in what they wanted to look for in the same way that we would do so in a search platform. So that's wonderful. I'm curious from this piece of motivation, if we could talk about learning fatigue. So how then the content and the context, you can avoid maybe the perils of getting too tired because there's too much information.
Yeah, cognitive overload is a real challenge, and it manifests in lots of different ways. I'll give you a real concrete example. Oftentimes when someone's putting together a learning experience, they might use slides, for example, and there's just way too much information on the slides. You're going to start shutting down learning. If there's just visual overload, the visual information produces cognitive overload, and now I can't make sense of what you're showing me, right? So we have to think about chunking information modularizing concepts. And I think that, again, digital learning platforms are really great at this. So to attend to cognitive overload in that scenario, in any given learning experience, really think about creating short segments. You know, we did research with MIT in 2014 that determined the ideal length of video, not just for attention span, but also for learning retention, was between 4 and 12 minutes, but really 6 to 8 is best. You know, less than 6, sure, there might be some concepts that can be taught in less than 6, great, but you know, a lot of concepts need more time than that. You get beyond 12 minutes or really beyond 8 and people start to shut down. It's just too much. They need a break. They need to reflect before they learn something new. So that's an example of how you can work with our cognitive capacity by chunking or modularizing concepts. And tying that into active learning, you'll do a short video about something and then follow that with an activity. So I watched a video, now maybe ask me to talk about this with somebody, or ask me to do a knowledge check, just a quiz on what I just heard, or ask me to draw, right? And so that combination of attending to people's cognitive capacity, working with it, and having them engage in an activity is actually going to keep people's fatigue at bay. But even if you design something that is super engaging, we all reach a max, right? We all just need a break. And in fact, what the learning science shows us is that spaced learning, meaning taking breaks, actually increases retention. It actually increases the transformation of learning. I need to stop. I even need to forget a little and then go back and be reminded. It's something called retrieval practice. It's an incredible method of helping our memories get stronger. I've been taught a concept on Monday. Maybe I did an activity. Tuesday, Wednesday goes by. When I come back to the learning on Thursday, why don't we review that material? And in that review, I have to recall it. And in recalling it, I'm literally moving the information from one part of my brain into a deeper part of my brain. So it actually becomes part of my knowledge moving forward. And then in 3 months, 4 months, I don't completely forget it. So working with cognitive capacity, super important, and in fact can sort of super boost, if you will, your learning if you attend to cognitive fatigue.
And then touching on in the realm of inclusivity, what have you seen at edX in terms of adapting to people's needs or working in languages that are less common?
So first and foremost, our platform itself, Open edX, is an accessible platform. We adhere to a WCAG standard for accessibility. And that means that if you have a hearing or a vision impairment, you can use screen readers, for example, to be able to navigate the content on our platform. In addition to that, as our content providers, the partners of edX who are creating courses, as they put content into our platform, they also follow accessibility guidelines. So, you know, some examples of what does that actually mean. For every video that you put up, and I would highly encourage your teams to do this too, make sure you have a transcript. Transcripts are like curb cuts. You know, curb cuts on the sidewalk, yep, they help people who have some agility challenges, people in a wheelchair, people with a cane, be able to get on and off curbs easier. But you know, they also help people with strollers, carrying heavy packages, right? So there's a universality to the curb cut. Transcripts are very much the same. A video transcript will allow a screen reader for someone who may have a visual impairment to be able to hear an audio of it, or if someone needs to be able to listen to it or read it later, you know, the transcript really allows for that. So it doesn't matter if I can or cannot hear the transcript later or right now can help me still get the get the learning. So our platform is accessible. That's one of the things that we do. And then another aspect of that, to your point, is languages. You know, most of the courses on our platform are in English. We have a significant portion that are translated into Spanish, and also there are a good number of our courses where they have crowdsourced additional translations of the videos and then put those translated transcripts into the platform so you can choose. You can choose the captions that you want to see below in a different language. I'd love to see a lot more of that. I'd love to see the crowdsourcing of an additional language across a lot of our content. But that's something that has been really gratifying to see people contributing in that way.
I have to apologize to our guests because I've been jumping all around today in terms of our outline, asking questions from all over the place. So I will open up to the floor for a moment, I think, to either stay in a place of peer learning or a little bit further around the theme of literacy and digital learning there.
Literacy, I think, would be a wonderful, if we could jump into that area, that would be most vital, as I think it really follows on what Nina just said in terms of accessing the information either by language literacy, but then there's also this whole piece around technical literacy. That would be wonderful. Nina, in your opinion, regarding technical literacy, what are the things that we should keep most prioritized?
I haven't actually thought about this question in a while. One of the, something that we did very recently when a lot of schools ended up going remotely is we created a course on edX called How to Learn Online. We created this course very, very quickly. Most of the courses on our platform we don't create, they're created by our partners. But my team created this one course called How to Learn Online. And one of the reasons why we felt that was important is because we thought that learning literacy was important, meaning that you need to understand how to best set yourself up for success to learn. And one key concept in that, and I realize I'm not answering your question directly, so I apologize for that. But one of the key concepts of that is just understanding what this environment, and I'm waving my hand at like the technical environment, does to our ability to focus, for example, right? Having the understanding that your attention in the digital environment, particularly if you're on the internet, is always, they're always trying to pull your attention to something else, right? Whether there's something flashing on the screen or it's just a notification or what have you. And so the environment really tries to pull our attention away. So in my mind, when I think about, in this regard, technical literacy and learning literacy, being cognitively, being aware of the technical environment that will literally get in the way of my learning if I'm not really diligent, right? Understanding that, okay, maybe I should find out where those notifications can get turned off. Maybe, you know, I should close those separate tabs while I'm trying to learn, so that I focus and pay attention. That's the way I've most recently thought about this intersection between, you know, being a really engaged learner and the sort of technical environment within which a lot of us are having to now learn. I think, unfortunately, as we were forced to work from home and learn from home, and meant that we were engaging with Zoom and other technologies on our computers, we didn't bring along with that the recognition that those technologies themselves are going to help and also really challenge us. And so with the How to Learn Online, we tried to address some of that. You're now having to learn remotely, learn online. Be aware that this environment, while it's fantastic, also presents challenges that you need to navigate.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. I have one question that's a little bit out of left field, so we didn't discuss this beforehand, but I know that you will have an answer to this, which is, it's a question about credentialism. One of the things that we run into a lot in the space of cacao farmer training is, for example, this particular group that we're working with in Nicaragua, they have a median level of education of less than 6 years. So they have received primary education and do not have additional diplomas or certifications beyond that. And there is very much among them and among the groups that provide with services, a desire to have them receive a certificate that is a kind of proof that they have learned at the end of trainings. It's essential if they want to build any kind of career with as these kind of non-traditional careerists or learners. But at the same time, being based in the United States, I see this intense growth in credentialism. I'm concerned about the fact that sometimes the credentials provided don't come with any real value. It almost feels transactional, like there was a payment made to learn something, and the reciprocity here is you get a piece of paper that you can list on a resume or a CV. So I'm wondering, could you just speak it broadly to this notion of credentialism? How does edX think about these things and manage these questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a, maybe not a crisis, but a challenge that's facing professional education, facing tertiary education, K through 12 even to some extent. And has really been, has gotten to the heart of what does teaching and learning mean? What does education mean? If all it takes to get a university degree is you hand over a lot of money and then someone hands you a diploma at the end, but you actually haven't learned anything, I think that we then have to ask ourselves, like, what is it we're paying for? So for me, this question gets back to course design. It gets back to curriculum design. The credential is only as good as the learning that is being assessed. So connecting authentic assessment, meaning truly measuring what you intend to teach in ways that will have tangible outcomes or measurable outcomes is essential. So, and only if those learning outcomes are achieved is the certificate issued, because the certificate doesn't just stand for I paid money for the certificate. The certificate should stand for I learned, and then very clearly, these 5 learning outcomes. And I can prove that because an assessment assessed my knowledge on those learning objectives. So aligning, it's called aligning the learning. Aligning your learning objectives to the assessments are critical for a really authentic experience and for a certificate that means something. Now, how do you then sort of prove that in the world? Like when somebody goes through your training and they've gotten the certificate, what does that mean to anybody who hasn't experienced that, learning? Right? What is it going to mean to the associations that they want to connect with? What is it going to mean to the employer that they might want to work for? This is where it's going to be really important to grow the value of your credential within your network. So it would be great to have external evaluators, right? Who are saying, yes, this learning provided by this organization, we have seen the results either because we've worked with the farmers who've had this training and they do well, on XYZ. We have hired, these people and they've been qualified and have been an incredible value add to our organization. And so that external proof is also going to be important. I do agree with you that there is, it's a good story and a challenging story. There's been a lot of increased access to education. I think that's really good, but the quality of that education that people have access to varies greatly. And those credentials, you don't know if the alignment of learning objectives to assessments is as robust and authentic as one would want. And because there's so many new credentials created every day and week, it's hard to understand, both as a learner and then perhaps as someone evaluating a potential employee or whatever, what that credential means. So our approach to that is both in the design, working with our university partners, our corporate partners who have an incredibly laudable experience in creating robust learning, making sure that they take those same best practices and put them into the learning that they're creating on edX. So a student in MIT takes a course on MIT campus. MIT also offers that same course online on edX, and the assessments are the same. and the learning outcomes are the same. And so the quality of that learning is not less because it's online. In fact, it's kept at the same bar. Really important. And then it's looking for those proof points that I just described with employers who hire folks who present with certificates that come from us. It's looking to educational institutions that enroll students after they've taken courses on edX and getting testimonials and so forth from them. I think those are really some of the really critical ways in which you can, make your credential stand out from the others, and also like to be authentic about what you're offering. The more evidence that you can demonstrate in those different voices or stakeholders, I think that the better for your program.
Thank you for that. This immediately takes me into thoughts about kind of even just labor practices within the cacao and chocolate supply chain, which is, for many people, especially younger people, they don't necessarily find cacao farming an attractive career path because it doesn't feel like a career in which you can generate wealth, in which you can advance your knowledge, in which you can move to different types of positions. These are in many ways kind of luxuries that we are able to experience in the type of work that we do. But there are increasingly pathways to be able to kind of work one's way up in the world of cacao. And so we see these types of trainings, these types of credentials, essential to supporting that, to making it meaningful, to pegging it to some kind of maybe salary increase, or some kind of recognition by bodies both local and international of people's expertise, and of also, again, going back to earlier points, recognizing existing knowledge that does not typically receive any kind of credential, but it's not because it isn't there. It's simply because that hasn't been employed appropriately for this cultural context.
You've hit upon a few things that I think are absolutely critical, and this is definitely work that we've been doing at edX for a good number of years now. You said the word pathways, and one of the things that we do at edX is that we try to provide learners, when they land on us through whatever keywords that they have asked, we try to present to them what are the pathways to these skills, right? Great, you're interested in data analytics. What about data analytics? So do you want to go into this kind of career? Are you interested in just learning how to do pivot tables in Excel? Like trying to suss out what the student is motivated by, and then directing them to the right learning for them, providing the pathway, right, for that. Absolutely critical. People come self-motivated. They come with mental models of what they think a thing is, but part of the value of education is to also guide, right, is to guide people who are curious and interested and want to learn more to the resources that are going to help them achieve their goals. We don't all come knowing exactly, to your field, maybe there are skills I can learn in this training that are applicable in jobs and opportunities that I never imagined before because this isn't my area of expertise yet. Right? So how can your organization offer those clear pathways? Oh, you learn this, you could go this direction, or you could deploy it over here, or you can go that direction. It's absolutely critical, and that's part of education, that guidance. So I'm really glad to hear you describing it that way, because I think that that's going to really serve your learners so that they stay super motivated and understand what the outcomes are they should expect.
I have been learning so much from this conversation, and I'm looking forward to rereading the transcript so I can follow up on some of the points here. I would love to touch on the space of intergenerational learning before we move on to our final questions, because we're just about to hit our hour and I know you've got another appointment afterwards. So if, Nina, you have any experiences or any courses that stand out surrounding that space?
There's one from a while ago. I will admit it's a bit of an older anecdote, but I still do love it. And then I can talk about a few more recent ones. So there was a course that was offered by the University of Notre Dame, and they offered the course to the world on our platform, but they also were offering it on campus in what's called a blended format. So students on campus were also taking this course. And what they had was they had invited a bunch of alumni. If I'm remembering correctly, the course was about the development of nuclear armaments and weapons, about the Cold War. And the students, of course, at the university were not born during the Cold War. They came after. But in conversation about that history, they were communicating with alumni and others taking the course who had lived through it. And so they were making real in their experiences, oh, I remember when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, or what have you, and talking to the campus students who, obviously for them, this was just history. So that's, that's just one example of that. A lot of our university partners are leveraging their alumni to be mentors to students that are coming to their courses. We see that on our platform in something we call community TAs. And so I will say, I don't know as much about like age differences between these, but those who have experienced the learning and perhaps the profession want to give back by being mentors in these courses. And of course, that connects back to the importance of peer learning. And so we see quite a bit of that happening. And when you're offering learning at scale like we are on edX, where you've got, again, thousands of students, 10,000 students in a course, there's just that much more opportunity for finding those connections, finding folks who want to give back in that way, and participate in, the next run of the course. So, yeah. Some few anecdotes about what I've seen there.
That's a great point regarding the mentorship aspect and sort of acknowledging the inherent wisdom there. Certainly, I believe in cacao farming, we need that for many reasons, especially if people have migration backgrounds or backgrounds that offer different aspects. To this point, I would say also your experience with digital learning and equality and access is a question I would like to bring up. For example, in cacao farming, typically cacao farming training is offered to the people who own the land title, as in the title to the land. And there are other members of the family who have skill sets or often participate in the labor of doing cacao farming. For example, the partner, the adolescent or older children who are young adults. In your experience, digital means to not just hit one person who might be, or offered to one person who might typically get access to education, but really everybody who participates in their job. How do you see that as developing in the future, digital for equality?
Well, I think it's actually one of the biggest remaining challenges of where we've come so far. Again, I think we've done a great job, not just edX, not just other MOOC platforms, but universities and other educational institutions, of opening access by using digital tools. But we need to attend to that equitable access. And I think that there is great opportunity to do so. I'll say really quickly, our platform also is mobile ready, which means that if you don't have Wi-Fi access, you can still download videos, watch them later, take quizzes, participate in discussions using a mobile phone. That is just the beginning of what we need to really lean into. So I think that making sure that we're providing equitable access is the challenge of our future for all educational organizations, but particularly for technical platforms like ours.
Thank you so much for your participation today, Dr. Huntemann, and you all for taking part in the conversation. To close, do you have something that you'd like to put on a billboard, a message of sorts?
I still, the whole reason why I'm motivated to be in this field is because the transformational power of education is unmatched. You can be from any socioeconomic background, from any ethnic racial background, and education can transform your life, which is why access to education is so absolutely critical, absolutely critical. So I never can say things very pithily, but we need to make sure that the transformative power of education is equitably accessible to everyone. And that will change our world. It won't just change individuals. It won't just change communities. It will change societies. It will change the globe. I truly believe that.
And is there something that we can do for you here or the audience listening that will impact or help your work directly?
Go to edX.org, find a course, tell your friends. Obviously, we've got so many different topics and subjects for you to explore. I'd love to see you learning on edX and certainly telling others about those experiences. So come with me, learn with me.
A pleasure to have you here today. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, Nina, and we'll stay in touch.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.